Hello, my name is Christopher Ellers, and I'm the Special Events Associate here at the Japan Society, and I'm really truly honored and happy to be able to lead this discussion group on medieval Japanese literature written by women. Today, we read the Sarashina Diary, or As I Crossed a Bridge of Dreams, by the daughter of Sugawara no Takasue, and we read the translation by Ivan Morris, who's a very interesting individual. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump right in. So the two big people here to know are the daughter of Sugawara no Takasue, or Takasue no Musume. She was born in the year 1008. And so she lived solidly in the 11th century, in the height of the Heian period in Japanese history. And then the translator was Ivan Morris. Ivan Morris is very interesting. He was born of a mixture of American and Swedish background. He was kind of a Renaissance guy, along with being a wonderful translator and scholar of both modern and classical Japanese and medieval Japanese literature and culture. He was also an expert chess player and played the tenor recorder and spoke a lot of different languages. So kind of a jack of all trades. And he was the head of the East Asian Languages and Cultures department at Columbia University in the 1960s. So a really interesting, really wonderful guy. Some important facts about the work. This diary, shall we call it, was written over a very long period of time. The daughter of Takasue, who is also called Lady Sarashina by the translator, so I will probably do that because it's a lot easier to say than daughter of Takasue. So Lady Sarashina started this around the age of 12, and she finishes it around when she's in her 50s. So it covers a really long expanse of time. There's also a certain amount of looking back and reminiscing and editing as well. It starts, of course, with her moving from the provinces to the capital. So it's a really interesting time period because it starts with her travels, and also because there's a lot of detailed descriptions of her pilgrimages. This is considered one of the first pieces of travel writing in Japan, travel writing being a very famous and beloved genre in Japanese literature. So it is famous for its travels. It is also famous for its many uses of, or its many descriptions of dreams. Like Lady Sarashina writes down a lot of her dreams. It's a little bit more than what we might be used to with other previous works, where we might get a few here and there. She has a lot. But then, of course, she also famously disregards her dreams as well. So she'll write them down and then she'll be like, oh, but then I didn't listen to them and I didn't tell anybody about them. So that's interesting. There are two main translations. There's many translations, but there's two main big translations. One is by Ivan Morris, which we read. The other is more recent. It's by a woman named Sonia Arntzen. They are both really, truly wonderful, but I think the Ivan Morris translation is easier to get your hands on because it's a Penguin Classics. So that's one of the reasons why I chose it. And then I skipped the family connections, last but certainly not least. I wanted to mention that the Lady Sarashina is related to some very famous people. She is directly related to a famous courtier named Sugawara no Michizane, who I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But she's also related to two authors that we should all know very well, Murasaki Shikibu, author of The Tale of Genji. She is related to her through her stepmother. And then the mother of Michitsuna, the writer of the Gossamer Diary, this is a relation, she's actually an aunt to Lady Sarashina. She's related through Lady Sarashina's biological mother. So interesting family connections. And she definitely would have been very familiar with her aunt's work. And we know that she's very familiar with The Tale of Genji. She is the first super fan of The Tale of Genji, as when she was born, it was still being written, so it's still very new. But even as it was being written, everybody in the court recognized that this was like an incredible work of literature. So it already had prestige as it was being written. And Lady Sarashina is often described as the first superfan since she references it all over the place and just talks about how much she loves it. So the major events, obviously it starts with her very extensive description of her move from the provinces to the capital. And this is filled with her obsession with the tales, as Ivan Morris translates what she says. Um, she loves the tales. She hears all about the tales. She wants to read the tales. And that doesn't really happen until she gets to the capital. And she is able to exploit some family connections and get a whole set of the Tale of Genji and all of these other works. And she just reads from dawn till dusk all the time. There was the connection with the daughter of Fujiwara no Yukinari, the major counselor. Um, when Lady Sarashina was learning how to write beautifully, she would copy the daughters of Fujiwara no Yukinari's own handwriting from her journals. And so she had kind of a connection. So when she died, Lady Sarashina felt very remorseful and very emotional. But then again, she seems to come back as a cat and live with Lady Sarashina and her sister for a little while until the cat is unfortunately burnt to a crisp. And then there is also the relationship with her sister, and including her niece or her children, her nieces, I believe they were. Her sister's children, she has a strong connection with. She ends up raising them after her sister passes away, which is again a big blow to her. We have what I've called the Jimoku outcome. So Jimoku is the name of the ceremony that would happen twice a year in the Heian court, once in the fall and once in the spring. And basically they were the ceremonies for promotions. So the emperor would hand out all of the promotions to everybody. And the outcome for her father, Sugawara no Takasue, was that he was upgraded, but he was upgraded to be a provincial governor for a province that was rather far away. So he has to leave. It's very emotional. They don't think they're ever going to see each other again. But then luckily he is able to come back sometime later. She ends up serving at the court for brief, sporadic periods. I mean, it's for a while, but she only goes in for like a day or a couple of days. And so she's never able to be there long enough to build up her own kind of status for herself. But she does have this weird romance that happens in the midst of her own marriage. This romance is to this other gentleman that she meets on a very rainy night. They have a discussion. That's basically it. She sees him one other time as he's walking down the hallway, basically, and he walks by her. But that's a very brief encounter, and they never really see each other ever again. But she does have a husband who is different. The husband kind of pops out of nowhere, in my opinion. When I was first reading this, I kind of was taken aback. I was like, wait a minute, did I read that right? She has a husband now, but she does have a husband. And although she doesn't really describe him very affectionately in the beginning, eventually he does pass away, and that is a very big blow to her. And then at the end, we just have a lot of descriptions of her different pilgrimages, more dreams and her musings. She talks about how remorseful she is that in her youth, she was swept away by the romanticism of the tales, and she didn't have any more concrete goals for her spiritual future. She did not try to get into Buddhism earlier, and she reprimands herself for that. And she relies on this one final dream that she has about seeing the Amida Buddha before her, beckoning to her, and she's too afraid to go to him. So he says that he'll go away, but he will come back to bring her to the Pure Land. Right. So that is a brief little summary of the events. The one other thing I wanted to talk about before our discussion is I wanted to bring up Sugawara no Michizane because he's very famous. Sugawara no Michizane was a very famous early courtier, and he was very famous for his poetry and also for just being an incredibly literate person. He has a poem in the Hyakunin Ishu. This is my own translation that I provided here of the Japanese. But he was really famous. He ends up kind of having an unfair ending to his own story of life. But because of this, or partially because of this at least, after he dies, he ends up being deified and is known as the god Tenjin, who is the god of literature and academia and whatnot. A lot of people pray to Tenjin around their exams so that they pass. And he's also very famous as a figure of theater. There's a very famous kabuki play called Sugawara Denju Tenarai Kagami, which is translated often as Sugawara and the Secrets of Calligraphy. It's definitely a very dramatized, imaginative retelling of his life, including characters that never existed but are kind of based off of his poems. But it has a very famous final scene called the Terakoya, which is very interesting in world literature, or in the history of world literature, because it actually was sent as Japan's gift to the World Fair around the turn of the 20th century and became incredibly popular, the script that is, and it was translated into various Western languages and became really, really popular and was turned into an opera by two different composers at the very least, one of them being Karl Orff, which you might be familiar with. So very interesting guy, very famous guy, and she does not talk about him at all, but this is her lineage. And like Michizane, she herself, Lady Sarashina, is a rather wonderful poet.